Marcus Ellison had been sitting in the driver's seat of a $620,000 car for exactly 90 seconds before anyone decided he was a criminal. He hadn't touched the ignition. He hadn't touched anything but the wheel, resting his hands where 40 years of habit put them, 10 and 2, thumbs loose. The way his father taught him on a Ford pickup with a cracked dash and no air conditioning. What he didn't know yet was that this exact car already knew his name. It was stamped inside it, in brass, 11 inches from his right knee. Nobody at the dealership had bothered to look. In about 20 minutes, someone would, and by then, the police would already be on their way. 6 hours earlier, Marcus Ellison was lying on a creeper under a 2019 Range Rover with a knocking noise that 3 other shops had failed to diagnose, in a converted machine shop on the edge of Franklin, Tennessee, with a box fan running because the shop's air conditioning had died in July and Marcus hadn't gotten around to fixing it, on principle. Because a mechanic who can't survive 6 weeks without air conditioning isn't a mechanic in his opinion, he's a customer with a lease. Ellison Precision was 1 bay, 1 lift, a coffee maker that hadn't worked right since spring, and a reputation that travelled entirely by word of mouth across 4 counties. Marcus was 47 years old. He had 11 regular clients who owned cars worth more than most houses in his neighbourhood, and he charged every one of them the same hourly rate he charged the elementary school music teacher 2 streets over who brought her Corolla in twice a year and always tried to pay him in banana bread. On the pegboard above his workbench hung a set of chrome vanadium wrenches so old the size markings had worn smooth under 4 decades of thumbs. They had belonged to his father, Otis Ellison, who was 79 now, and still called Marcus every Sunday at 11 in the morning to ask if he was taking care of his tools. A question that was really a question about something else entirely, and both men knew it, and neither had ever said so out loud. Otis had spent 22 years at Beaumont Ford in Memphis, a dealership that no longer existed, torn down in the 90s for a self-storage lot. On paper, for all 22 of those years, Otis was a porter, the man who moved cars across the lot, swept the service bay floor, pulled parts from the back room. In practice, half the diagnostic work that came through that dealership passed through his hands first, quietly, off the clock, credited on the repair ticket to whichever certified technician happened to be standing nearest when the customer walked up. Marcus grew up in the garage behind their house on Delwood Street, handing his father sockets by feel in the dark because the porch light had burned out and there hadn't been $20 to spare that month for a bulb. Otis taught him to read an engine the way a doctor reads a chart, by sound, by smell, by the specific way a thing that's wrong announces itself if you know how to listen. He also taught him something else, something Marcus had carried into every room he'd ever walked into since. Smile when you're spoken to, move like you have somewhere to be, never let them see you take it personally, because the second you do, you've handed them the whole argument. Marcus had built a career on that advice without ever fully forgiving it. For 19 years, he'd worked as a calibration engineer for Corsaro Automobili's North American Technical Division, the man who spent whole seasons out at the company's proving grounds in North Georgia, translating a car's raw mechanical potential into something a human hand could actually feel through a steering wheel. Corsaro built maybe 4,000 cars a year, worldwide, every one of them assembled the way a violin gets assembled, by hand, by people who signed their work. Marcus had written the suspension damping profile that every Corsaro built in the last decade still used as its baseline architecture. Inside the company, engineers who'd never met him in person called it, informally, the Ellison curve, the way physicists still say Newton's laws, without expecting to shake the man's hand. He'd left 3 years ago. Not fired. Not forced out exactly. Nothing so clean as that. He'd simply watched, for 2 promotion cycles running, a director's role go to men with half his tenure and a fraction of his track record. Men who explained his own work back to him in meetings, as though he might not have understood it the first time he wrote it. Nobody ever said the word out loud. Nobody ever had to. Marcus did the math the way his father had taught him to do every kind of math that mattered, quietly, without drama, and decided his family was worth more than one more cycle of waiting to be seen. He came home to Franklin, opened Ellison Precision, and told himself, some days more convincingly than others, that he didn't miss it. At noon that day, a black Suburban had pulled into the gravel lot outside, and a man in a suit that cost more than the lot's monthly lease climbed out, looked past Marcus standing in his own bay doorway in a stained flannel, and asked when the mechanic would be free. "You're looking at him," Marcus said, wiping his hands on a rag, unbothered, because it happened at least twice a month, and he'd stopped keeping any kind of score around year 2 of owning the place. The man's name was Richard Averill, a hedge fund analyst who split his time between Franklin and Manhattan, and he had a European sedan making a whine at highway speed that 2 other shops, one of them a franchise dealer, had diagnosed as a wheel bearing and charged him $1,100 to replace. Twice, on 2 different wheels, without the noise going away either time. Marcus didn't ask for the paperwork from the other shops. He listened to the car idle for 4 seconds, walked it up onto the lift himself, and had his hand on the actual problem. A cracked plastic fan shroud vibrating against the radiator core at exactly 1 specific engine speed in under 6 minutes. "That's it?" Averill said, staring at a $40 part like it had personally wronged him. 2 shops replaced bearings on both sides for that? 2 shops heard a whine and reached for the expensive answer first, Marcus said, already reaching for a new shroud off the shelf. Cheap answers usually right. People just don't like saying it out loud, because it doesn't sound like it earned the bill. Averill paid him $90 for the part and the labour, tried twice to tip him another $100 on top of it, and left saying he'd be telling every person he golfed with about this place. Marcus had heard some version of that sentence roughly 200 times over 3 years, and precisely 11 of those sentences had ever turned into an actual referral, and he'd stopped being bothered by that math a long time ago too. He wasn't running the shop for golf course word of mouth. He was running it so that nobody who walked through the bay doors ever had to wonder. The way he once had, whether the truth of what was wrong with their car depended on who was standing there to say it. His phone rang at 1:40 that afternoon. He wiped his hands on a shop rag and answered it with grease under 3 fingernails. Marcus Ellison. "Mr. Ellison. Hi, it's Jasmine Carter, over at Corsaro of Franklin." A young voice. Professional. A little rushed. A phone held slightly too close to the mouthpiece. "Renata Cole set up a private viewing for you today. For the Tempesta 70? Car number 12? She said you'd be expecting my call." Marcus smiled before he answered. Renata Cole had been 24 years old when he'd trained her at the test track, a junior engineer so sharp it had made him nervous for his own job within the first month. She was Corsaro North America's vice president of performance engineering now, and she still called him every time something in the company's history was worth showing him first, before it ever reached a press release. "I remember," Marcus said. 3 o'clock, right? 3 o'clock. I'll have the car pulled up front for you." "Ms., Cole said to tell you, car 12 still remembers you." A short laugh. Her exact words. "I don't totally know what that means yet." "You will," Marcus said, "when you see it." He hung up, looked at the Range Rover still up on the lift with its knocking noise unsolved, and decided it would keep until tomorrow. He went home first to change his shirt, not for the dealership, he told himself, but because the flannel smelled like brake cleaner, and stood in front of the closet for longer than a man going to look at a car he already knew intimately had any real reason to. He picked the flannel anyway, in the end, clean this time, because he'd decided a long time ago that changing who he was for a room was a debt he wasn't going to keep paying. The dealership sat at the top of a low hill on Franklin's west side, all glass and white limestone, the kind of building engineered to make a person feel slightly underdressed before they'd even parked. Marcus pulled his truck, a 14-year-old F-150 with 210,000 miles on it, and a Beaumont Ford air freshener still clipped to the vent. A joke between him and his father that had outlived the dealership itself, into a visitor spot between a Bentley and a car that still had dealer paper plates taped in its rear window. And he sat there for a second, doing the thing he always did before walking into a room like this one. He checked his shirt. He checked his hands. He reminded himself, out of 40 years of habit, that he had every right to be there, and reminded himself, out of that same 40 years, that the reminder was still necessary at all, and that the necessity itself was the whole injustice, folded into a single quiet moment in a parking lot nobody else would ever see. Jasmine Carter met him at the door before he'd finished crossing the lot. She was 26, sharp navy blazer a size too formal for how nervous she still was in it, a lanyard reading new associate in small print beneath her name. 6 weeks into the job, a draw against commission that didn't quite cover daycare most months, and a 4-year-old son at home named Isaiah who thought his mother sold the fast cars, which wasn't technically true yet, but which she hadn't corrected him on because he said it so proudly. Mr. Ellison, it's genuinely an honour. I read about the Ellison curve in my product training binder before I even knew it was named for a real person. She laughed, a little embarrassed at herself. This way. She's right up front, under the skylight. She. Car 12 of 70 sat on the showroom floor, like something carved rather than assembled, matte carbon the colour of wet slate. A rear wing that looked drawn rather than bolted on, a hood line Marcus recognised the way you recognise your own handwriting on an old letter. 70 units, worldwide, $620,000 at the window sticker before a single option got added. Marcus had driven an early prototype of this exact chassis for 11,000 miles on a test track outside Atlanta, 3 full years before it ever wore paint. "Go ahead," Jasmine said, gesturing at the open driver's door. Ms. Cole was specific about it. Sit in it, not just look. She said you'd know what to check for. Marcus lowered himself into the seat the way a person lowers themselves into a chair they've sat in 1,000 times, even though, in this exact car, he never had. His hands found the wheel. 10 and 2. Out of 40 years of habit, his left hand drifted along the underside of the dash edge, the place where, on every prototype he'd ever driven, a technician's build tag was riveted, small, brass, easy to miss unless you already knew to look for it. His fingers found it. A thin rectangle, no bigger than a matchbook, stamped with letters he couldn't read by feel. He smiled, private and small, and didn't think about it again. Jasmine's radio crackled at her hip. "Carter, I need you at the Aventador delivery. Now, the client's here 40 minutes early, and Reyes is out sick. I've got nobody else on the floor. I'm 2 minutes," Jasmine told Marcus, already backing toward the service hall, apology all over her face. "Seriously, take all the time you want. I'll be right back." She was gone before Marcus could tell her it was fine. He sat alone in the car for 4 minutes, running his hand along the stitching on the wheel, feeling for the specific resistance in the paddle shifter he'd fought for across 18 months of his life against 3 separate engineers who'd insisted it should feel softer. It felt exactly right. It felt like an argument he'd won, sitting quietly under a skylight, waiting for the rest of the world to notice. He didn't hear Grant Halsey approach until Grant was already 10 feet away, walking fast, jaw set. Grant Halsey was 34 years old, 5 months into the general manager job at Corsaro of Franklin, and still operating in the particular low-grade panic of a man who understood exactly how replaceable he was. He'd gotten the position after the previous GM was let go following a theft at a sister store 2 states over. A walk-in customer who'd talked his way into an unsupervised test drive and simply never brought the car back. And corporate's message afterward, delivered by Grant's own mentor at a regional managers' meeting over bad hotel coffee, had been informal but unmistakable. "Watch the room. Watch the ones who don't fit it. You will not get fired for being careful. You will get fired for being careless." Grant had absorbed that instruction the way people absorb things they've decided never to examine too closely. He was 31 days from the end of a 90-day performance review. His own father had lost a small hardware business decades earlier to an embezzling employee, and had never fully trusted anyone who worked for him again for the rest of his life. And Grant had grown up watching that particular fear get passed around the dinner table like a family recipe nobody ever questioned the ingredients of. He had never once in 34 years been asked to sit down and name what he was actually afraid of. He simply knew in his body, before he knew it in words, what a problem walking through the door looked like. A man in a clean but plainly working-class flannel shirt, sitting alone in the driver's seat of a $600,000 car with no salesperson anywhere in sight. Matched that shape exactly, and matched it before Grant had processed a single other fact about him. Sir, I need you to step out of that vehicle." Marcus looked up, unbothered, already reaching for the door handle. "No problem at all. I'm here for a viewing appointment." Jasmine had to step away for a delivery. "Step out of the car, please." Marcus stepped out. Hands visible without deciding to keep them that way. Another piece of his father's inheritance he'd never had to consciously think about until exactly this moment. "I have an appointment. 3 o'clock, under Renata Cole's name. She's the vice president of—" "I don't have a Renata Cole on today's schedule. She's not the one who'd be on your local schedule. She's corporate. Cole, C-O-L-E, Performance Engineering." Grant's eyes moved over Marcus once, top to bottom, the flannel, the work boots, the grease still faintly visible under one knuckle. "Do you have ID?" "I do." Marcus reached slowly for his wallet, narrating the motion out loud, the way 30 years of practice had taught him to narrate every motion in rooms exactly like this one. "I'm reaching for my wallet, back right pocket." Grant took the license, glanced at it for less than 2 seconds, and handed it back without appearing to actually read it. "This tells me your name is Marcus Ellison." "It doesn't tell me you have an appointment." "Call Jasmine Carter. She let me in herself 5 minutes ago, and she can pull the log. Jasmine's a new associate. She's 6 weeks in. She doesn't have the authority to book a private viewing of a 70-unit anniversary launch car. I do, and there's nothing on my calendar." His voice had climbed half a register, the particular tightness of a man narrating his own competence to himself out loud while he spoke it. "I need you to wait by the front doors while I sort this out." A man in a checked sport coat, browsing a demo Gran Cabrio 20 feet away, had stopped pretending not to watch. Marcus felt the room's temperature the way he'd felt rooms exactly like it his whole life, the specific, controlled chill of a space built to make a customer feel wealthy, currently making him feel exactly the opposite of that. "I understand you have a job to do," Marcus said, and meant it, keeping his voice level in the exact register his father had drilled into him across 100 Sunday calls. "I used to work for this company. 19 years, calibration engineering, out at the technical center in Georgia. I know exactly how these launch previews get scheduled, because I used to be the reason they got scheduled. Call Renata Cole's office. It will take you 90 seconds to confirm every word I've said. I'm not calling a corporate VP because a man I found sitting alone in a customer's car told me to." Grant folded his arms. Front doors. "Now please." Grant walked back to his office and closed the door, and for a moment, alone, he did something he would never mention to anyone afterward. He stood with both hands flat on his desk and breathed like a man trying to talk himself down off a ledge only he could see. 31 days left on his review. A GM's job he'd wanted for 6 years, finally in his hands, hanging by a thread thin enough that he could feel it fraying in real time every single week he held it. He called Dale Prowitt, the regional director who'd given him the Watch the Room speech over hotel coffee 5 months earlier, because Dale was the only person in the company Grant trusted to tell him he was right. "There's a guy in the showroom, sitting alone in car 12, Grant said. "Low, fast, no sales rep with him. Says he's got an appointment, says he used to work for the company. But there's nothing on my calendar and I can't verify a word of it." "What's your gut telling you?" Dale asked. "That something's off." "Then something's off. You know how many times I've second-guessed my gut in this business and been sorry for it? A pause, papers shuffling on Dale's end. You're not paid to give strangers the benefit of the doubt around a 70-unit launch car, Grant. You're paid to protect the store. Do what you need to do. Grant hung up feeling, for exactly 90 seconds, like a man who'd just been handed permission for something he'd already decided to do anyway. It didn't occur to him, standing there, that he'd asked his mentor a question about his gut, and never once asked himself the far simpler question sitting right in front of him. The one with an actual, checkable answer, 3 keystrokes away on the monitor at the front desk he hadn't touched all day. Marcus walked to the front doors. He did not argue further, because arguing further had never in his father's arithmetic been the version of a moment like this that ended well. He stood near the entrance with his hands loose at his sides, and watched, over Grant's shoulder, as the man walked back toward the sales desk, not toward a phone directory, not toward the appointment system on the front counter monitor that would have resolved the entire question in under a minute, but toward his own cell phone, dialing a number 3 digits too short to be corporate. Otis Ellison had been arrested once, in 1974, for standing in the customer lounge of Beaumont Ford on his lunch break, in his own work uniform, at the dealership where he'd worked for 6 years by that point. He'd sat down in a chair by the coffee urn, same as he did most days, and a different porter, a man named Curtis who'd started that same month, had waved him off toward the back room without asking a single question first, and a manager passing through had decided, in the space of about 4 seconds, that the lounge was for customers only that particular afternoon, and had it confirmed for him by a squad car 20 minutes later. No crime, obviously, no charge. An apology, eventually, that nobody bothered to write down anywhere. By the time it was sorted out, Otis had lost 4 hours of pay, and something else that never showed up on any timesheet at all. He told Marcus that story exactly once, when Marcus was 19 and about to take his first job at a shop with a white owner across town. They were in the garage behind the house on Delwood Street, Otis Ray gapping spark plugs by lamplight because it was after dark, and neither of them wanted to stop for the night. "They're going to test you," Otis had said, not looking up from the plug gauge. "Not out loud. Nobody's going to hand you a written exam. They're just going to watch you a little longer than they watch the other new hire, and wait a little longer before they trust what you tell them, and you're going to feel it happening and not be able to point to a single sentence anybody said that you could complain about." "Then how do I win?" Marcus had asked, 19 and certain there was an answer with an edge to it. "You don't win it. You outlast it." Otis set the gauge down and looked at his son directly for the first time since he'd started talking. "You're going to be twice as good and get asked to prove it twice as often. That's not fair, and I'm not going to sit here at damn near midnight and tell you it is. But get good anyway. Get so good the question stops being worth their time to ask. Getting good is the only part of this whole equation you actually get to control." "Did it work?" "For you?" Otis was quiet long enough that Marcus thought he wasn't going to answer at all. "Some days," he said finally. "Some days it worked so well it scared me, how good I'd gotten and how little it had bought me. Other days I drove home so angry I couldn't tell you a single mile of the road I'd just been on." He picked the plug gauge back up. "I'm not telling you it's a fair trade, son. I'm telling you it's the only trade on the table, and a man's got to decide if he's going to play it with his whole chest or half of one. I played it with my whole chest for 22 years. I'd do it again. I just want somebody to have told me, going in, exactly what it was going to cost." Marcus had believed the getting good part completely, at 19. He believed most of it still, at 47, standing by the front doors of a dealership he used to help design cars for, watching history rhyme in real time, 400 miles and 49 years from the coffee urn at Beaumont Ford. What he was no longer sure of, standing there, was whether his father had actually believed the getting good part would ever be enough on its own, or whether he'd simply needed Marcus to believe it, so that Marcus could survive long enough to find out for himself. Jasmine came round the corner 4 minutes later, saw Marcus standing by the exit doors like a man being asked to leave, and her expression went from confusion straight to something close to panic. "Mr. Ellison, what happened?" I told him you had an appointment. He's saying you're not authorized to book private viewings, Marcus said quietly. That's not. I logged it in the system myself this morning. It's right there under today's schedule. Jasmine turned toward the sales desk, where Grant now stood with his phone still pressed to his ear, and started walking that direction fast. Grant, I logged Mr. Ellison's appointment myself. It's under VIP walkthrough, courtesy R. Cole. I can pull it up on the desk monitor right now. It takes 10 seconds, Jasmine. Get back to the Aventador delivery. I've got this handled. You don't understand. He actually worked for the company. He's the one who I said I've got it handled. Grant's voice cut flat and final across the showroom floor, loud enough that 3 separate customers looked up from what they were doing. If you'd like to keep this job past your 90 days, you'll let me do mine. Jasmine went white, and then very quiet. Marcus watched a 26-year-old single mother do the exact calculation his father had done 1,000 times before her, weigh what was fair against what she genuinely could not afford to lose, and watched her lose it. Because the math never actually changes, generation to generation, no matter how much people insist out loud that it has. Priya Nathan, a service technician 8 years into the job, had come out onto the showroom floor to grab a talk spec sheet from the front cabinet and stopped near the sales desk when she caught the tail end of Grant's conversation with Jasmine. She didn't know Marcus Ellison's face. She knew his name, the way half the technicians in the building did. From a laminated reference sheet taped inside every service-based tool cabinet, a damping profile quick guide that every new tech got handed on day one, credited at the bottom in 6-point type. Baseline architecture. M. Ellison. Wait, she said, half to herself, then louder, stepping toward Grant. Did you say Ellison? As in, she gestured vaguely toward the service hall, toward the cabinet, toward 8 years of muscle memory. That's like an actual name on our training materials. That's not a coincidence-sounding thing. It's a common enough last name, Grant said, not looking at her, already walking back toward his office. I've got this handled, Priya. I'm just saying, if there's any chance it's actually him, that seems like something worth 5 minutes to check before. I said I've got it handled. Priya stood there a second longer, talk sheet forgotten in her hand. Weighing the same math Jasmine had already lost a few minutes earlier, a service tech was even further from being heard on the sales floor than a sales associate was, and went back to her bay without pushing it further, though she'd repeat the exchange, almost word for word, to 3 separate co-workers before the day was over. Each time ending with some version of I told him, I actually told him, and he didn't want to hear it. An older woman near the Gran Cabrio, silver-haired, wearing a watch that cost more than Marcus's truck, had quietly slipped her phone out of her handbag. Diane Whitfield was 68 years old, had bought 4 cars from this exact dealership over 11 years, had a framed photo of her late husband's old Corsaro on her mantel at home, and had absolutely nothing at all to lose by recording precisely what she was watching. She didn't hide the phone. She also didn't announce it. She simply held it steady at hip height, thumb on the screen, and kept her face as neutral as a woman who has decided to become a witness can manage to keep it. Grant hung up his phone and turned to face the showroom floor like a man who had just made a decision he needed everyone present to watch him make. Police are on their way, he announced, mostly toward Marcus, partly toward the room at large. Just a routine check. Standard procedure whenever someone unauthorized is found alone inside a vehicle of this value. I wasn't alone in it when you found me, Marcus said quietly. I was alone in it because your own associate put me there and got called away. That's your version of it. It's the true version of it. Those aren't always the same thing to you, but they're the same thing to me. Grant didn't answer that. He walked back toward his office, and Marcus stood by the front doors of a dealership he used to help design cars for, waiting on the same institution his father had once waited on, 49 years and 400 miles apart, and separated by absolutely nothing that actually mattered. The 2 officers who arrived 11 minutes later were not unkind. Exactly. They were efficient, and they were fast, and they had walked into a story that had already been told to them once, by the man who'd placed the call, in the man's own words, before either officer had exchanged a single sentence with Marcus Ellison directly. "Sir, I need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. I haven't done anything. I have an appointment. I can show you the confirmation text on my..." "Turn around, please." Marcus turned around. The cuffs went on cold, click by click, and he stood in the middle of a showroom under a skylight, 12 feet from a car he'd personally spent 11,000 test track miles teaching how to turn, while 8 strangers watched him get treated exactly like the thing his father had spent 22 years quietly proving, ticket by uncredited ticket, that he was not. He did not raise his voice. He did not resist so much as a single inch. He recited, silently and evenly, the same lines he'd been reciting to himself since he was 19 years old. Don't take it personally. Don't give them a reason. Get good. Getting good is the only part you control. And for the first time in a long time, standing there with his wrists locked behind his back, beside the single most technically perfect car he had ever helped bring into the world, he found himself wondering whether his father had ever fully believed the third line either, or whether he'd simply needed Marcus to believe it so that Marcus could survive long enough to find out for himself. The same way Otis had needed his own father to believe some version of the same lie. All the way back down a line neither of them had ever had the luxury of tracing. "Mr. Ellison, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." Jasmine had come back around the corner and stopped dead, one hand over her mouth. "It's okay," Marcus said, and it wasn't. And they both knew it wasn't. But there was no version of that particular room where saying so out loud made a single thing better. Diane Whitfield kept her phone raised, steady, still recording. Grant stood near the sales desk with his arms folded, watching, and for just a moment, before he caught himself and rearranged his face, there was something close to relief in his expression. The specific, private relief of a man who believes, right up until the exact second he's proven otherwise, that he has just been careful instead of cruel. Renata Cole walked through the front doors of Corsaro of Franklin at 2:57 p.m., 3 minutes ahead of a walkthrough she'd deliberately moved up because she hadn't seen Marcus Ellison in person in almost 2 years, and hadn't wanted to waste a single extra minute of the visit on logistics she could handle by phone from the car instead. She stopped just inside the doors. For a full 2 seconds, Renata Cole, Vice President of Performance Engineering, Corsaro Automobili North America, the woman whose name would be on the press release for car number 12 by 6 o'clock that evening, simply could not process what she was looking at. Then the pieces arranged themselves, all at once, and her face went through something that everyone in that showroom would describe differently later, but that Diane Whitfield, still filming, would describe as like watching someone's whole expression catch fire in real time. "Marcus?" Every head in the showroom turned. Marcus Ellison. Renata was already crossing the floor fast, ignoring the officers, ignoring Grant, ignoring everything except the man standing in handcuffs beside the car she'd flown 400 miles to unveil in person. What is happening right now? Ms. Cole, Grant stepped forward, and something in his posture had already begun to change, the particular deflation of a man realizing, in real time and in front of witnesses, that the story he'd been narrating to himself for the last 40 minutes was about to stop holding any weight at all. "You know this individual? Do I know him?" Renata turned on Grant with a calm that landed harder in that room than shouting ever could have. "This man wrote the damping profile that's running in every single Corsaro currently on your showroom floor, including the one he's standing 3 feet from. Every calibration engineer this company has hired in the last decade studies his work before they study anything else in their first 6 months on the job. Internally, we call it the Ellison curve. I'm going to assume that phrase means nothing to you, because I'm going to assume you never once, at any point today, tried to find out. There was no appointment on file that I could personally verify. There was an appointment on file that your own associate logged this morning. An appointment I personally arranged by email 3 weeks in advance, with her and with you, CC'd on the original thread." Renata's voice hadn't risen. It had gotten quieter instead, which was worse. "Officer, would you mind checking the vehicle's build documentation? There's a plate riveted just under the dash edge, driver's side. It carries a name." One of the officers, visibly uncomfortable now, leaned into the car and ran his fingers along the underside of the dash until he found it. He read it aloud, slowly, like a man reading something he was only just beginning to understand the actual weight of. M. Ellison, calibration lead. Chassis 012. The showroom went completely, entirely silent. "That's the build tag," Renata said. "Every prototype and every anniversary unit this company produces carries one. The name of the person who physically tuned it before it ever left the factory floor. Marcus tuned this exact car himself 3 years ago, months before either of us knew it would ever be built for retail sale at all. He is not a man who resembles someone with a connection to this vehicle. He has been, personally, physically, mechanically present in this car's history longer than you have worked at this dealership." Grant's mouth opened, and for a moment nothing came out of it. "He told you he used to work for the company," Renata said. "He gave you a real name to call and confirm it with, and an actual, verifiable path to check every part of what he was telling you in under 2 minutes. Instead, you called the police on a 47-year-old man for sitting in a car he helped build, because he was wearing a flannel shirt with grease on the cuff, and you had already decided who he was before he ever opened his mouth to correct you." "I was following procedure," Grant started. "What procedure specifically? Walk me through it. Which step of it was calling my office to confirm an appointment already logged under my name?" Grant said nothing. Which step was checking the front desk system before dialing a phone at all? Still nothing. "I have 31 days left on a performance review," Grant said, finally, and his voice had lost its edge entirely, gone thin and almost young. "The last GM got walked out for a theft he didn't even see coming. Corporate told me, straight out, watch the room, watch the ones who don't fit it, or you'll be the next one walked out. I wasn't trying to hurt anybody. I was trying to keep my job." "I understand that," Renata said, and for the first time her voice softened, just slightly, though nothing else about her posture did. "I believe you. But watching a room and watching a person are not the same instruction, Grant, and somewhere between the two of them, you decided this man was the room's problem before you'd asked him a single real question. That's not a policy failure. That's a choice you made over and over for 40 straight minutes when you had every opportunity to make a different one." "No," Marcus said. It was the first thing he'd said in almost 2 minutes, and it landed harder for the silence surrounding it. He was still in handcuffs. He said it without heat, without triumph, in the same level voice he'd been using since Grant first walked toward him across the showroom floor. "You weren't following procedure, Grant. Procedure is checking the appointment log before you make a phone call. Procedure is asking one question before you decide the answer to it yourself. What you were actually following was an instinct. And the instinct was wrong, and I think somewhere in you, you already knew that before the officers even got here. Because if you genuinely believed I was here to steal that car, you'd have been afraid standing this close to me. You weren't. You looked relieved the second those cuffs went on. Relieved, not alarmed, because it meant you'd been right about something. You weren't right. You were just fast, and you mistook fast for careful, and those two things are not the same, and today they cost you finding that out in front of every single person in this room. Nobody moved. "Officer," Renata said quietly, "please take those off him." The cuffs came off. Marcus rolled his wrists once, unhurried, and did not rub them the way people do in movies, because he'd promised himself 30 years ago that he would never give a room the satisfaction of watching him look wounded in it. He called Renee from the parking lot before he'd even started the truck, because he'd promised her a long time ago that she would never hear about something like this second-hand, from a stranger before she heard it from him. "I'm fine," he said before she could ask, because he knew the shape her voice would take the second he told her, and he wanted to get the important part out first. "I'm fine. I'm sitting in the truck. Nobody hurt me." Marcus, just his name, the way she said it when she needed the rest of the sentence a second before he was ready to give it. He told her all of it. In order, the cuffs, the showroom floor, Renata walking through the door at the exact right minute like something out of a story nobody would believe if he wrote it down. Renee didn't interrupt once. She'd married a mechanic's son from Memphis 22 years ago, knowing exactly what kind of Sundays that meant, exactly what kind of phone calls, and she'd promised herself the same thing her mother-in-law had once promised herself about Otis, that she would never once make him carry it alone in a house where he was supposed to be safe from it. "Come home," she said finally.
I don't care about the car. I don't care about the apology. Come home so I can see your face.
"I'm coming," Marcus said. "Renee, Naomi doesn't need to hear the version with the handcuffs in it. Not tonight. She's going to hear it eventually. She's going to hear all of it eventually, from somebody. I know. I just want it to be me, when I've got the right words for it. Not tonight, off a video some stranger posted." Renee was quiet for a second. "Okay," she said. "Tonight it's just us. Come home." The two officers left within 10 minutes, apologetic in the clipped, procedural way officers are trained to be apologetic when a call turns out to have had no crime attached to it anywhere along its length. No charges, no report filed against Marcus because there was nothing on the books to file. A brief, quiet exchange between the responding officer and Grant near the front doors, out of easy earshot, that Jasmine would later describe to Marcus as the first time in my life I've watched a full-grown man get told off by a cop, without the cop ever once raising his voice to do it. Diane Whitfield's video reached 40,000 views by dinner time and 200,000 by the following morning, not because it was dramatic, by the ordinary standards of the internet, but because it was exactly as undramatic as it needed to be. A calm, wrongly accused man, a visibly unravelling manager, and 11 seconds of a brass plate being read aloud on camera that would make an entire regional office reconsider a personnel file by lunchtime the next day. Naomi Ellison found out at 7:40 the next morning, in the school hallway, 3 minutes before homeroom, when a classmate she barely spoke to held up a phone and said, "Isn't this your dad?" Like it was gossip instead of her father's face on a stranger's screen, cuffed under a skylight, with a caption underneath calling him brave for staying calm, as if calm had been a choice made freely and not a survival skill inherited the way some families pass down a house. She watched 11 seconds of it standing at her locker before she made herself stop, walked straight to the office, and called her mother instead of finishing the school day pretending she hadn't seen it. Renee came and got her before lunch. Marcus met them both at home that evening, and this time he told the whole story himself, cuffs included, sitting at the kitchen table with the version he'd wanted to give her from the start. Not the clipped, softened one he'd planned for a quieter night, but the honest one, because the internet had already taken the choice of timing away from him, and the least he could do was make sure she never had to hear the real weight of it from anyone but him again. "I'm sorry you saw it that way first," he told her. "That's the one part of this whole thing I actually wanted to control, and I lost it before I even got the chance to try." "I'm not mad at you," Naomi said. "I'm mad at whoever thought putting handcuffs on you was the normal part of the story." Marcus didn't have an answer for that one that made either of them feel better, so he didn't try to manufacture one. He just sat with her at the table a while longer, the two of them quiet, until it felt like enough. Corsaro Automobili's corporate leadership placed Grant Halsey on administrative leave within 48 hours, pending an internal review. That review turned up, without much difficulty, a second complaint from 4 months earlier. A black physician from Nashville who'd been followed unusually closely around the showroom floor on a visit that ended in no sale. A complaint that had been logged, filed, and never once followed up on by anyone above Grant's own signature. Grant was not fired outright. The regional director's report, which Renata would later read aloud to Marcus over the phone almost word for word, concluded there had been no documented malicious intent on record, only the report went on, an instinct he never once stopped to check, which is its own category of failure, and one this company can no longer afford to keep paying for in other people's dignity. Grant was demoted out of the general manager role and reassigned to a smaller store 2 hours away, and required to complete a bias awareness program that, according to the regional director who monitored his file afterward, he initially resented, and eventually, by all visible evidence, did not. Jasmine Carter kept her job. Renata made certain of that personally, in a phone call to the regional office in which she used the word retaliation exactly once, and made clear she wouldn't need to use it a second time. A local news producer called Ellison Precision 11 times in 3 days. Marcus let 9 of the calls go to voicemail before he finally picked up the 10th, mostly to make it stop. "We'd love to have you on for a segment," the producer said, warm and fast, the particular warmth of someone who has already written the headline before the interview happens. Wrongly accused black business owner, factory legend, the whole story. Our viewers are going to eat this up. "I appreciate the interest," Marcus said, wiping a socket wrench clean out of habit while he talked, because his hands didn't know how to be idle even on the phone. "I'm going to pass. Can I ask why?" "This is a good story. You come out of it looking like the hero of it. That's exactly why I'm passing." Marcus set the wrench down. "You said it yourself. I come out of it looking like the hero because I happen to have a build plate with my name stamped in the right car at the right moment. Most people this happens to don't get a brass plate to save them. I'm not interested in being the story that makes people feel like the system worked, when what actually happened is I got lucky on top of being right, and being right by itself has never once been enough on its own. I'd rather put the energy into the fellowship. That story's got a better ending, and it's one more people can actually stand inside of." The producer tried twice more over the following month. Marcus said the same thing, close to word for word, both times, and eventually the calls stopped. He gave exactly one interview in the 6 months that followed, a 3-paragraph quote to the local paper, entirely about the apprenticeship program, with Grant Halsey's name left out of it on purpose, because Marcus had decided a long time before any of this happened that he was not going to spend the rest of his life narrating another man's failure for an audience that would forget both their names by Friday. Dale Pruitt called Renata 4 days after the video went up, before corporate's formal review had even concluded, trying to get ahead of it. "I want to be clear, I never told Grant to call the police on anybody," Dale said. "I told him to watch the room. That's a normal instruction in this business." "Is it normal at the store you ran, Dale? Or just normal at the ones you've handed off to somebody else once things got hard to defend?" Renata's tone stayed even, professional, unhurried. I pulled Grant's call log. "You spent 90 seconds on the phone with him and reinforced his gut instead of asking him a single clarifying question. You're on this review too. I'd start thinking about how you want your name to appear in it." Dale didn't call back a second time. The regional office's final report, when it came, named him in a footnote, not as the man who'd made the call, but as the man who'd had 90 uncontested seconds to slow it down, and hadn't. That Sunday, at 11 in the morning exactly, Marcus's phone rang the way it had every Sunday for as long as he could remember. And Otis Ellison's voice came through asking the same question he always asked. "You taking care of your tools?" "Always," Marcus said. "Same as always." And for a moment neither of them said anything else. Because Otis had already seen the video, Naomi had shown it to him over the weekend, against Marcus's wishes. And Otis had watched it 4 times through without saying a word to anyone until he called his son. "I watched a man read your name off a build plate like it was scripture," Otis said finally, and his voice had a rasp in it that hadn't been there the last time they'd talked. 49 years, Marcus. 49 years since a squad car pulled up outside a dealership for me, and standing beside somewhere else's car cost me an afternoon and a story I only ever told you once. And here you are. Same thing. Near enough. Except this time, somebody in the room actually knew who you were before it was too late to matter." "I keep thinking about that," Marcus admitted. "How close it came to not mattering. If Renata's flight had been an hour later, if Jasmine hadn't logged the appointment right. There's about 6 different versions of that afternoon where nobody ever finds that plate, and I'm just a headline with no ending. Maybe, Otis said. Or maybe the plate was always going to get found, because you're the kind of man who leaves his name on things whether anybody's looking or not, and sooner or later that catches up to a room. I did the same work you did, all those years, and never once thought to sign it, because nobody ever handed me the tools to believe my name belonged on it. You didn't have to unlearn that the way I did. That's not luck, son. That's a difference me and your mother built into you on purpose. One Sunday phone call at a time. A pause, the particular pause of an old man deciding whether to say the next part out loud. I'm proud of you. Not for the plate. For the 20 seconds before anybody found it, when you were still just standing there, cuffed, doing the right thing anyway because it was right. Not because you knew how the story ended yet. Marcus sat with that for a long moment before he answered, because his father had never once, in 47 years, said the word proud to him over the phone, only in person, only rarely, and always like it cost him something to spend it. Thank you, Marcus said. Take care of your tools too, old man. Always do, Otis said, and hung up first, same as he always did. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat across a folding table from Renata Cole in the back office of Ellison Precision, a printed proposal between them and 2 cups of coffee neither of them had finished, because both of them talked with their hands too much to drink anything hot while they were doing it. I want to be straight with you about what I'm actually asking, Renata said. This isn't a consulting fee to make the company feel better about itself. I've seen those before, and they're worthless, and you'd see through it in about 4 seconds anyway. She slid the proposal across. I want a real program, paid apprenticeships, real certifications at the end of them, technicians whose names go on their own tickets from day one. 12 seats a year, 3 technical colleges to start, funded permanently out of the performance engineering budget, not marketing's. And I want your name on it, because your name is the only reason anybody at this company will believe it's not just a headline. Marcus turned the proposal over once, reading the fine print the way he read everything, top to bottom, twice. You know whose name I'd want on it instead of mine. Renata didn't need him to say it. She'd already met Otis Ellison exactly once, briefly, at a company barbecue 11 years earlier, and she still remembered clearly. The way the man had looked at an engine bay diagram taped to a folding table and corrected an error in it within about 6 seconds, without anyone asking him to. Then it's his name, she said. Obviously it's his name. I don't know why I even printed mine on the draft. 4 months after the day the police left his wrists cold and empty, a 19-year-old named Deshaun Fuller showed up at Ellison Precision for his first week as the fellowship's very first apprentice, carrying a backpack instead of a toolbox because he didn't own one yet, and looking like he expected to be told to sweep a floor and stay out of the way. Marcus handed him a diagnostic scanner instead, and a 2016 Charger with an intermittent misfire nobody had been able to pin down for 2 weeks, and said exactly 4 words, "Tell me what you hear." Deshaun got it wrong twice that first afternoon, and Marcus let him get it wrong twice. Standing back with his arms crossed the way nobody had ever stood back, and let him get it wrong when he was 19 and starting out, men had hovered then. Corrected before he'd even finished a sentence, taken the wrench out of his hand the second his fingers slowed down for a second to think. On the 3rd try, Deshaun found it, a hairline crack in a coil pack boot, invisible unless you knew exactly where a crack like that liked to hide. How'd you know to look there? Deshaun asked, genuinely stunned at himself. You didn't know. You listened until the car told you, same as I do, same as every good tech that's ever lived does. Marcus clapped him once on the shoulder. Write your name on the ticket. It's your diagnosis, not mine. Deshaun looked at the ticket for a long moment before he picked up the pen, like he was checking to make sure the line for a technician's signature was actually meant for him. 6 months after the day the police left his wrists cold and empty, on a warm Saturday morning in April, Marcus Ellison stood in the same showroom under the same skylight, in a shirt without a single grease stain on it, watching his father cut a ribbon that had no business being that thick for how small the actual crowd turned out to be. The banner above the service bay read the Otis Ellison Technical Fellowship in letters 2 feet tall. It was a partnership between Corsaro Automobili and 3 technical colleges across Tennessee and Georgia, fully funded out of Renata's own budget line, built to place 12 students a year, kids from exactly the kind of neighborhoods that used to hand a brilliant 20-year-old a broom instead of a diagnostic scanner, into paid apprenticeships with real portable technician certifications waiting at the end of them, no unpaid training period required anywhere in the fine print, no name ever left off a ticket again if the program's charter had anything to say about it. Otis Ellison was 79 years old, walked with a cane now, and had cried exactly twice in Marcus's adult memory. This made a third time, and he did not try particularly hard to hide it. 22 years, Otis said quietly, to no one and to everyone, looking up at the banner with his hand resting on his cane. 22 years I did the work and somebody else's name went on the ticket. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, long as the car got fixed right. He shook his head slowly. Once, it mattered. Took me the better part of a lifetime to say so out loud. Jasmine Carter, promoted 8 weeks earlier to assistant sales manager, stood near the front row with her son Isaiah on her hip, pointing up at the ribbon like it meant something he'd understand someday, which, in time, it would. The promotion conversation had happened in the regional office, not the Franklin showroom, 4 months after the video went up, and it had taken the district manager less than 90 seconds to offer it to her. You logged the appointment correctly. You tried to intervene, twice, at real risk to your own job. On your 6th week of employment, the manager had said, sliding a folder across the desk. That's not just a mark in your favour. That's the entire kind of employee this company is supposed to be able to point to and say, that's who we actually want on the floor. Jasmine had accepted before she'd finished reading the second page, and had called her mother from the parking lot afterward, crying in a way she hadn't let herself cry the day the handcuffs went on, because that day there hadn't been room for it, and this one finally was. She kept a folded printout of Marcus's build plate proposal, the one Renata had first sketched by hand at the regional office, the earliest draft of the fellowship, taped inside her own desk drawer now, not because anyone required it, but because she wanted to remember, on the days the job got hard again, exactly what kind of afternoon a person could still turn into something worth taping to a drawer. Diane Whitfield came too, in a pale blue suit, and told Marcus quietly near the coffee table that she'd bought a 5th car from this dealership the week after the video went up, not because of the video, she was careful to say, but because Jasmine had personally called to apologise on the company's behalf before anyone at corporate had told her to, and Diane had decided a place with an employee like that was worth staying loyal to. Renata Cole spoke for exactly 3 minutes before the ribbon came out, and kept it shorter than anyone expected from a company vice president standing in front of a banner with her own budget line on it. I've spent 17 years in this industry being told which parts of a car are feel and which parts are science, she said. And the man standing next to me taught me that the two were never actually separate categories to begin with, that the feel of a great car is the science, done by someone who cared enough to get it exactly right and patient enough to keep adjusting until it was. I'm not here today because this company did something generous. I'm here because this company finally started paying, on purpose, for something it had already been taking for free, off the clock, for longer than most of us have been alive. She didn't look at Otis when she said it, but everyone in the small crowd understood exactly who the sentence was for. 7 of the fellowship's first 12 apprentices stood in the front row in matching navy polos with Ellison Fellow stitched over the left breast pocket. None of them older than 22. All of them holding certificates they hadn't earned yet, but would, within the year, at 3 different technical colleges across 2 states. Deshaun Fuller stood at the end of the row, arms crossed the exact way Marcus crossed his, a detail nobody pointed out to him, because everybody in that row had already noticed it themselves. Grant Halsey was not there. He had, however, mailed Marcus a letter 3 months earlier. 4 handwritten pages, unpolished, occasionally clumsy in its phrasing, the kind of letter that plainly costs a person something to write, because it doesn't let them off a single hook along the way. It named exactly what he'd done, in plain language, without the word misunderstanding appearing anywhere in it, and it closed by saying he understood he had no right to ask Marcus to answer it. Marcus hadn't answered it. He'd filed it carefully in the same drawer where he kept his father's old, uncredited service tickets from Beaumont Ford. Not forgiveness exactly, but not nothing either. A record, the kind a person keeps because a thing happened, and because someday, to somebody, it might matter that it did. Car number 12 sat on a raised platform near the entrance now, permanently on display instead of for sale, with a small brass plaque mounted beside it that hadn't been there 6 months earlier. Chassis Number 2, calibrated by Marcus Ellison, who spent 11,000 miles teaching this car how to turn, and one afternoon teaching this dealership how to look before it judges. Renata had written that line herself. Marcus told her it was a little much. She left it up anyway. 16-year-old Naomi Ellison stood beside her grandfather during the ribbon cutting, holding his cane so his hands were free to clap, and later that afternoon, riding home in the truck with the windows down, she told her father quietly that she finally understood why he'd always made her say her own name clearly whenever she met somebody new. Chin up, no mumbling. No shrinking to fit a room before the room had even decided it needed shrinking from. Marcus didn't hand her the whole history that day. Some inheritances only travel at the speed a person is actually ready to carry them. That evening, after the folding chairs were stacked and the banner came down, and Otis had fallen asleep in the passenger seat before they'd even cleared the parking lot, Marcus drove his father home along the same stretch of road he'd driven 1,000 times, past dealerships and drive-thrus and a hardware store that had replaced a hardware store that had replaced something older still, and thought about a porch light on Delwood Street that had stayed burned out for exactly as long as it took a family to decide which $20 mattered more. It didn't stay burned out forever. That was the whole point, in the end, of everything that came after. He pulled into his father's driveway, cut the engine, and sat for a minute in the quiet before waking him, watching Otis breathe evenly against the window glass, 79 years old, and finally, after 22 uncredited years and 49 more spent carrying them, watching a program with his own name on it hand somebody else a wrench and say your name goes on the ticket before thee. Sentence had ever fully cost that somebody anything at all. Marcus thought about Deshawn's face the moment he'd picked up the pen. He thought about the porch light, fixed now, that he'd replaced himself the week after the ribbon cutting, for no reason he could fully explain, except that it had felt suddenly like something that needed doing. Then he woke his father gently, walked him up the steps one slow stair at a time, and let the whole day settle into whatever kind of ordinary evening came next. Because that, too, more than any ribbon or any plaque, was the actual shape of what they'd won. Respect that only shows up after you've had to prove you're a sum was never really respect at all. It was a test that should never have existed in the first place, and passing it doesn't undo the fact that you were made to sit for it. This story is a work of fiction. The characters, dealership, and events depicted are invented. But the pattern underneath it, a black customer or employee treated as a suspect first and a person second, in retail spaces, workplaces, and beyond, reflects a real and well-documented category of experience, one that shows up in consumer discrimination complaints, workplace bias reports, and disparities in how quickly law enforcement gets called on black individuals compared to others in similar situations. If any part of this story resonated with something you've lived through or watched happen to someone you love, you're not alone in carrying it, and you don't have to sit with it alone either. Organisations like your local NARCP chapter, a fair housing or consumer rights legal aid clinic, or your state's civil rights and employment discrimination complaint office exist specifically to help document and respond to exactly this kind of treatment. If this one hit you, drop her in the comments. I want to know which line landed hardest. Subscribe if you want more stories like Marcus's. There's a new one every week. And if someone in your life does quiet, uncredited work that deserves a name on the ticket, send them this one.